In the summer of 2007, Ukraine was plagued by a string of disturbingly violent unsolved murders. Victims suffered intense blunt force trauma, while others had screwdrivers inserted through their skulls. Such levels of brutality drove fear into the city's residents, who wondered who was capable of such horror and how they could avoid becoming the killer's next victim. It wouldn't be until late July, after 4 weeks of terror, that the culprits would be apprehended. To the shock of many, they were revealed to be 2 teenagers. Join us for this documentary as we examine the nightmarish case of the Dnepropetrovsk Maniacs. Viktor Sayenko, born March 1st, 1988, and Igor Supranyuk, born April 20th, 1988, both in Dnipro, Ukraine, had attended the same school together and developed a bond starting at the age of 14. During questioning, Sayenko reportedly told law enforcement that they had found some common ground together when they discovered that they both shared the same fears: heights and being bullied. As a result of this, they decided to work together to figure out a way to overcome their worst nightmares. And the first thing they did was stand on the balcony of an apartment on the 14th floor for hours on end, hanging over the railing. They later claimed that this helped to cure them of their fear of heights. On the back of this, the duo soon learned that another of their friends, Alexander Hansa, was afraid of blood, and they offered to help him face and overcome his phobia. Supranyuk was the first to suggest that they do so by torturing animals. They subsequently captured stray dogs in a nearby wooded area, hanged them from trees, and disemboweled them. After this, they took photographic evidence of their ruthless violence, which would later be used against them by the prosecution during their trial. In many of the photos, the boys can be seen drawing swastikas in animal blood, carrying out Nazi salutes, and even impersonating Hitler, but holding up items like toothbrushes across their upper lip to imitate his famous mustache. The boys' violence wasn't restricted only to dogs. Other neighborhood animals, including cats, also became targets. Reportedly, at least one lengthy video of 3 boys torturing a kitten was shown in court, and a veterinarian was called in to testify about the numerous videos he was asked to sift through. He admitted that the material was so disturbing that he was unable to keep the sound on while watching it, stating, "I couldn't listen to the painful squeals of puppies and kittens who were gutted, burned, and hanged alive." But even without the sound on, the content of the amateurish videos was clear. The boys had no problem abusing defenseless animals. Though such material was not shown in court, the mother of Hansa was adamant that her son could not have participated in such violence, claiming, "I just don't understand how my son could do such a thing, because he couldn't even bathe the cat. He said that it probably hurt him." Several years after the boys met, at age 17, Supranyuk was known to have beaten up a local boy and stolen his bike, which he then sold to Sayenko. By all accounts, Supranyuk was the more violent of the boys, with a fiery temper, and was prone to losing control. Following the assault on the young boy, some reports note that both Supranyuk and Sayenko were apprehended by the police, but were released again without punishment due to their age. Sayenko reportedly had no idea the bike was stolen, but despite the trouble he'd caused, he forgave Supranyuk and they continued with their friendship. Teachers recalled that Supranyuk came from a wealthy family, unlike many of his peers, with one noting, "His father is an aviator and his mother is an employee of the district executive committee. He is the only and dearly beloved son. They added that Suprinyuk's mother had an excuse for everything he did. She always defended and justified him. As well as being bad-tempered and violent, Suprinyuk was also known for his lack of academic excellence. In class, he was disruptive, and he often argued with his teachers. Despite this, classmates and friends found him strangely charismatic, even though they noticed his arrogance too. The few that Suprinyuk drew into his inner circle often became dazzled by him, following his every move and keen to keep in his good graces. Classmates observed that this was exactly what happened to Hansa and Sayenko. Both boys were quiet and mild-mannered until Suprinyuk came along. After that, they grew more difficult and troublesome. Their parents grew concerned about their relationship with Suprinyuk when they learned that all three boys, aged about 14, had been passing the time by throwing stones at the windows of trains at the local train station. They were eventually caught by the police, who requested compensation for the damage they had caused. Both sets of parents paid without squabbling, but they warned their children away from Suprinyuk. Not that it seemed to make a difference. Hansa, meanwhile, was at the complete opposite end of the spectrum from Suprinyuk. Teachers at his school echoed similar sentiments to his mother, that he was calm and level-headed, and that he didn't skip classes, he didn't fight. He was a seemingly forgettable student outside of that, as he never particularly stuck out and was never involved in trouble. Hansa had been attending culinary school after leaving high school, but he dropped out when his father died and took a job in construction to help support his family. But in May 2007, the company collapsed and he was left jobless. His mother claimed that he was devastated by the loss of his job and income, and added that her son was at home with her every evening. Upon leaving school, Sayenko began studying at Metallurgy Institute part-time, though he would later obtain work as a security guard, while Suprinyuk remained officially unemployed but made a living using his vehicle as an unlicensed taxi. Shortly after beginning this work, Suprinyuk appeared to get an idea. Using the help of his friends, Sayenko and Hansa, he began robbing his passengers. According to reports, however, Hansa didn't enjoy this life of crime, and although he participated in at least 2 robberies, he declined to participate in more. It wasn't long after Hansa's departure from the group's life of crime that Suprinyuk and Sayenko began escalating. Soon, simply robbing people wasn't enough. One former classmate of the boys later told the media that he believed their earlier stints killing animals were a build-up to something more, observing, "It seems that in 7th grade, Igor Suprinyuk developed a new craze. He decided to check whether he had the mental strength to kill. He decided to test himself on cats and dogs." It's possible that the escalation from killing animals to robbing humans to killing humans was all part of some sort of test that Suprinyuk had set himself. Investigators later stated that they believed the escalation was simply part of boredom, that both boys were looking for ways to entertain themselves, and so they decided to hunt their victims. However, one news report noted that same classmate had heard that the boys were very much into video games, and that through forums they encountered strangers who egged on their crimes and offered them money if they completed snuff films. Once, Sayenko told me that Suprinyuk contacted the owner of a foreign website on the internet, and he ordered him to make a very cool video for a large reward, the classmate stated. Notably, Suprinyuk's girlfriend recalled the boys saying, "We'll get rich when we kill 40 people," but she believed it was an inside joke that she wasn't privy to. Regardless of the motive, the fact of the case remains clear. In the summer of 2007, Suprinyuk and Sayenko decided to escalate their crimes. On July the 25th, the first recorded murders took place. Their first victim was a 33-year-old woman named Yekaterina Ilchenko, who was walking home from a friend's apartment. Sayenko later told investigators that he and Suprinyuk had gone out for a walk, but that Suprinyuk was carrying a hammer at the time. As Yekaterina passed them, he spun around and hit her on the side of the head with his hammer. According to reports, This first crime was rather tame in comparison to their later murders. There were no repeated blows or extreme violence shown at this time, but sadly, the single blow was fatal, and Yekaterina's body was discovered by her mother at 5 a.m. the following morning. After the two 19-year-olds killed Yekaterina, they went on with their night, and within an hour, they attacked and killed Roman Tatarevich, who was asleep on a bench not far from the first crime scene. It was during this attack that the boys upped their level of violence, smashing Roman's head with blunt objects numerous times, shattering his skull and making him unrecognizable. Notably, a later report by the Ukrainian media observed a third party had told the police that the two men had bragged about killing two people, one man, one woman, earlier in June while they were on holiday in the village of Kirillovka. The pair were hitchhiking on the highway when Supranyuk and Sayenko stopped by in the Daewoo and offered them a lift, which they accepted. They were subsequently robbed and murdered. The two teenagers claimed that since it was broad daylight, they couldn't let the pair go because they'd had too good a look at the car and could identify them. Therefore, they stated they had to kill them. This third party, Daniel Kozlov, a friend of the pair, told investigators that they spoke of their crime casually, as if they'd done it before. Less than a week later, on July the 1st, the bodies of two further victims were uncovered in the nearby town of Samar, known at the time as Novomoskovsk. The deaths of Yevgeny Grishchenko and Nikolai Serchuk had been tremendously violent. It was later observed that the killers only went out to select victims at night, and prosecutors noted that the young men did not hone in on one particular gender, social class, or age group. Instead, anyone could be a target, although the vulnerable and the unaware were much more of a draw as they were easier to overpower. Children, the disabled, the elderly, the homeless, or the intoxicated all made for ideal targets. A heavy metal object, usually a hammer but sometimes a steel construction bar, was most often used in the crimes, and victims were always struck on the head first. They sometimes stole valuables for their victims, but not always, with one police officer stating that they were capable of stealing mobile phones and leaving behind gold jewellery. On the night of July the 6th, 3 more people were killed in Dnipro. Egon Nechvaloda was the first to die. He was a military recruit who'd recently been discharged and who was attacked while heading home from a nightclub. As with Yekaterina, his mother discovered his body the next morning, lying by their apartment building. Just around the corner, 28-year-old night shift security guard Yelena Shram was killed. Zienko told investigators during his confession that when she walked towards them, Supranyuk struck her with a hammer and proceeded to continue hitting her even after she collapsed to the ground. As she'd been carrying a bag of clothes at the time, the 2 young men stole it, used the material to clean the hammer, and threw the bag out. The following day, Sayenko and Supranyuk struck again when they killed a 14-year-old boy, Andrei Sidyuk, who was fishing with his friend in the village of Piderhond. The friend, Vadim Lyakov, escaped a similar fate by fleeing the scene and hiding in some nearby woods. He was able to provide the police with a description of the 2 young men, noting that he hadn't seen them around before. Another 5 days passed before the 2 struck again. On July the 12th, 48-year-old Sergei Yatsenko went missing while riding his bike. At the time of his disappearance, Sergei was dealing with a cancerous tumor in his throat and was only regaining his ability to talk. He did odd jobs around town as he didn't like not working, and he had a wife, 2 children, and a grandchild. Sergei had been on his way to visit his grandchild on the day he went missing, but he never arrived, and his mobile phone was shut off at 6 p.m, around 3.5 hours after he left home. His wife looked for him that night with a friend, but ultimately reported him missing when they found no trace of him. His beaten body was found 4 days later. It was noted that even though 4 days had passed in the summer heat, allowing the body to begin decomposition, the evidence of the corpse's abuse was obvious. Days later, on July the 14th, 45-year-old Natalia Mamachuk was attacked while riding her scooter in the nearby village of Dyovka. While passing through a wooded area, she was knocked from her scooter and beaten to death with a metal implement, either a hammer or a pipe. Tsienko and Suprinyuk stole her scooter, and although several witnesses saw the tail end of the attack and gave chase, they lost sight of the two men responsible, though they were able to provide the police with a description which tied Natalia's case with that of Andrei Sidyuk's. Over the next 24 hours, a further 5 people were killed, and in the days that followed, another 6 people perished. Due to the random pattern of attacks, investigators did not initially suspect that the crimes were linked, although the fact that many were tortured and mutilated perhaps should have been an indicator. The violence inflicted upon the victims was unthinkable. Some had their ears cut off, others had their eyes gouged out while they were still alive, while some had screwdrivers inserted through their skulls. It would later be established that many of their crimes were filmed or photographed. Tsienko's mother, Tatiana, later found this out when she was told by police about the mutilation of a pregnant woman. In the video, her son, along with Suprinyuk, could be seen murdering a pregnant woman before cutting open her belly and removing the fetus. She recalled, "I can't believe that my son is capable of such a terrible crime." Their final body count was 21. The actions of the police following the beginning of the murders have been heavily criticised by the media. As previously mentioned, the lack of a pattern to the killings left investigators in the dark about the murders being connected, and as a result, nobody in the city was warned about the dangerous nature of the crimes happening. Residents of the industrial district, where the majority of the murders occurred, spoke among themselves about the crimes and told one another not to go out at night. It was well known here that a serial offender was afoot, and yet the police made no public announcement through the media. It wasn't until the police had the multiple descriptions of their suspects that they decided to make this information public, as well as the nature of their crimes. Furthermore, a list of information about the phones stolen from the victims was circulated among pawn shops in the city. A task force was dispatched from Kiev to help apprehend the criminals, and over 2,000 investigators worked on the case. On July the 23rd, investigators got a break when one of the victims' cell phones was turned on and tracked to a pawn shop. Suprinyuk had attempted to sell the phone for the equivalent of about $46 in today's money, and the trace was made when the worker turned the device on to make sure it was in good condition. The police soon descended on the store, and the 2 teens were apprehended before they could leave. Alexander Hansa was also arrested. He'd been in the middle of flushing mobile phones and some other valuables down the toilet when police arrested him at his home. Although investigators left without the evidence, they were later able to collect it when residents in the building complained of the pipes being clogged, and a plumber recovered it all. Many of the devices belonged to the boys, but much of the video footage was lost by this time. The phones themselves were not enough evidence to convict Tsienko and Suprinyuk, but upon speaking with friends of the 2 young men, investigators were able to gather more information and build up a picture of their leap into violent crime. One of their most valuable witnesses was the previously mentioned Daniel Kozlov, who testified against the group in court. Though the police held a press conference in regards to the arrests, progress was slow to be made. Many locals speculated that the boys were well connected. After all, Suprinyuk came from wealth, and Tsienko's own father worked in a law office. This led many to believe that the families would attempt to buy the teenagers' way out of trouble. However, it was later announced that the boys would be charged with their crimes. Suprinyuk, Tsienko, and Hansa were all charged with being involved in 29 crimes, broken down as 21 murders and 8 assaults where the victims survived. Suprinyuk was charged with 21 counts of capital murder, 8 counts of armed robbery, and 1 count of animal cruelty, while Tsienko was charged with 18 murders, 5 robberies, and 1 count of animal cruelty. As Hansa was not believed to be directly involved in the murders, he was only charged with 2 counts of armed robbery, referring to the 2 robberies he participated in with friends before the murders started in June 2007. All 3 of the men confessed quickly, but Suprinyuk later withdrew his confession. His lawyer attempted to enter a plea of not guilty by way of insanity, but this was rejected. Sienko's father did not believe that his son was responsible and alleged that the duo had been set up to cover up the crimes of someone with far more money and power. He claimed that the relatives of some wealthy individuals had originally been investigated in connection with the case, one of whom was a nephew of a high-ranking official, while the other was the son of the deputy of the chief of police in the region. Despite these claims, though, no evidence was found to support it. In fact, the vast majority of the evidence pointed to Supreniuk and Sienko being responsible. Such evidence included blood-stained clothing, the mobile phones and stolen goods discovered in the pipes of the apartment building, the fact that the two men were caught red-handed with the victim's phone, the testimony of Daniel Kozlov, and the videos and photographs recovered from their devices. The prosecution requested life imprisonment for Supreniuk and Sienko, and 15 years of hard labor for Hansa. One of the most vital pieces of evidence was a video that was leaked to the internet, named 3 Guys, 1 Hammer. It shows the murder of 48-year-old Sergei Yatsenko, who can be seen lying on his back while he is struck repeatedly with a hammer wrapped in a plastic bag. He is impaled in the eye and abdomen with a screwdriver and struck yet again with the hammer. The 6-minute murder ends with one of the teens smiling at the camera before they walk back to their car and discuss what they just did, barely registering the fact that they snuffed out a human life without a second thought. They laugh at some of the grotesque details of the murder before cleaning their hands on the hammer. It is said that Supreniuk is mostly the one on camera, while Sienko is the one behind it. Other photos recovered from their devices included them flipping off the coffins and gravestones of their victims and further animal abuse, including images of mutilated corpses. Over 300 images and 2 videos were shown in the court. When Supreniuk and Sienko were asked if they recognized the people in their images, they said that they didn't, to which the judge reportedly told them, "You are not blind." An expert on video and image alterations testified that the original material had not been doctored. The defense, meanwhile, alleged that the 2 teens had been framed as part of a cover-up. This was in part because Sienko's defense was led by his father, a lawyer, whom Sienko requested after discovering that his appointed lawyer had only graduated from law school just 2 months earlier. Igor Sienko made all sorts of allegations as part of his son's defense, pointing out improperly kept records, issues about the way the 2 were interviewed by police, and claiming that illegal searches were carried out at their home. He also argued that a videotape of their apartment showed the evidence after it was discovered, but not the discovery of the evidence itself, implying that it had been planted. Igor also claimed that the 2 men and 1 woman had been caught by police carrying out one of the murders, but that they had been falsely booked under the names Sienko and Supreniuk and did not resemble the 2 teens standing in court. Sienko's defense team also argued that he had a psychological dependence on Supreniuk, whom they labeled the ringleader of the entire operation. They claimed that Supreniuk constantly threatened Sienko into going along with his plans and not going to the police, adding that Sienko, as a result of this, feared for his life. Sienko himself testified in court that he lived in fear of his friends since they were 16. On February the 11th, 2009, both teens were found guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison. Supreniuk was found guilty of 21 counts, while Sienko was found guilty of 18. 15 years were added to their sentences after they were also convicted of robbery and animal cruelty charges. They later attempted to appeal their sentences, but this notion was rejected by the Supreme Court of Ukraine. Hansa, meanwhile, was sentenced to 9 years in prison. He later claimed, "If I had known the atrocities that they were capable of committing, I would have not gone near them at gunpoint." The parents of Sienko and Supreniuk continued to maintain that their sons had been set up. They also argued that Hansa's punishment had been much too lenient. They are not alone in this, as 48.6% of Ukrainians polled believed that he should have been given a harsher sentence. The decision not to press charges against Hansa in regards to his friend's crimes has been a controversial one as a whole, given that he had possession of the mobile phones and stolen items, and appeared to know that something was going on. Hansa's family maintained that he'd done nothing wrong outside of the 2 robberies for which he was charged. His brother later told the media that Hansa was beaten while awaiting trial. He'd seen the bruising for himself. Of the murders, he added, "I don't think my brother could have done something like that." Hansa was released in 2019 after serving 9 years in prison. He is currently married with 2 children. In April of 2011, 2 teenagers were arrested in connection with a series of murders carried out in the city of Irkutsk, Russia. 19-year-old Artyom Anufriev and 18-year-old Nikita Litkin chillingly claimed that they'd been inspired by the actions of Suprenuk and Sienko, whose case they'd read about on the internet. Like them, the 2 young men chose vulnerable individuals whom they felt they could easily overpower. They were dubbed the Academy Maniacs, or the Hammermen of Irkutsk, by the media, and injured 9 people on top of their 6 murders. Anufriev was given life in prison, while Litkin was sentenced to 20 years behind bars. A motive for the Dnepropetrovsk Maniacs' actions was never established. Sienko claimed that they'd carried out the murders in order to rob the victims and make money, but the prosecution argued that they left behind valuables at the time, so this didn't make sense. There were also the allegations from classmates that the 2 teens had gotten wrapped up with a man who ordered snuff videos from them in exchange for money. This would explain their need to film and photograph most of their crimes. However, this notion was rejected by the court, which observed that there was no evidence to support the idea that they were creating snuff movies for profit. The judge would later state his belief that their crimes had been motivated by a desire for morbid self-affirmation. Deputy Interior Minister Nikolai Kupiansky, meanwhile, stated, "For these young men, murder was like entertainment or hunting." He believes the 2 young men killed simply for the thrill of it all.